People are calling it panic. That's the easy headline. That's the loud headline. That's the version built for people who want one emotion, one villain, and one clean takeaway. But when you slow this down, the real story is more dangerous than that. Because this war is not just threatening Trump politically. It is brushing right up against something much more personal. His credibility, his control, and yes, the security question that has followed him for months now. Whether the Iran conflict is colliding with the very assassination threat U.S. officials have already tied to Tehran-linked plots against him. In 2024, the Justice Department charged an Iranian-linked operative in a murder-for-hire plot involving Trump and other U.S. figures. And this month, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth publicly said the U.S. had killed the leader of an Iranian unit he described as being behind an attempted plot to assassinate Trump. That's the exact incident people need to anchor first. Not vague fear, not random drama, not some movie script fantasy. A real war with Iran. Real reporting about prior Iran-linked assassination plotting against Trump. And a White House now trying to fight a regional conflict while the president's own personal threat picture keeps hanging over the story. And that matters for three reasons. First, this war hits Trump at the exact point where strategy and personal grievance start to blur. Second, it raises the cost of every decision because he is not just managing a conflict. He is managing one with a history that includes alleged threats against his own life. And third, even if you hate the word panic, the pressure around that mix can still make a president look reactive, boxed in, and politically exposed. That's the spine of this whole story. Now let's get one thing straight before people start yelling at the screen. There is a difference between saying Trump is under massive pressure and saying we have proof he is literally terrified in private. Current reporting supports the first claim far more than the second. Trump has publicly projected confidence, saying the war may end soon and that he is not afraid, while also escalating threats toward Iran and linking current actions to earlier assassination plotting. That counterpoint matters, because if you exaggerate, people stop trusting the script. So let's keep this clean. This is not about mind-reading Trump. This is about reading the situation around him. And the situation is ugly. Because presidents already make bad decisions when war gets personal. Add in prior assassination allegations, rising regional escalation, attacks on ships and energy infrastructure, and a widening conflict that keeps threatening to outgrow the original plan, and suddenly every move looks heavier than it did on day one. AP reported today that the conflict has intensified with Iranian attacks on Gulf energy sites after Israeli strikes on Iran's South Pars field, while shipping around the Strait of Hormuz remains under pressure, and the administration is discussing a huge supplemental defense request tied to the war. That is not a normal operating environment. That is a stress environment. And stress environments reveal things. They reveal whether a leader is driving events or being dragged by them. They reveal whether messaging is steady or improvisational. They reveal whether every next move is part of a plan or part of a reaction chain. And that's why this story has so much energy right now. Because people are not just watching bombs and maps. They are watching whether Trump still looks like the man in charge of the war or the man being cornered by it. Start with reason one. This war hits Trump where strategy and personal grievance collide. That matters because wars are supposed to be sold to the public as national decisions, not emotional ones. Interest, security, stability, deterrence. Those are the official words. But once a conflict overlaps with a prior plot against the president himself, the whole thing gets messier. The public starts wondering whether decisions are being made on strategic logic alone, or whether personal score settling is now part of the atmosphere. Hegseth's public remark that Trump got the last laugh after the killing of an Iranian figure he said was tied to an attempted plot against Trump only intensified that perception. That's the concrete example. The administration's own messaging helped fuse the war with the personal threat narrative. And here's the punchline for reason one. The moment war starts sounding personal, every strategic move starts inviting political suspicion. That does not mean the threat is fake. It does not mean Iran wasn't linked by U.S. officials to serious plots. It means the public hears the conflict differently once the president's own life becomes part of the backdrop. Now go to reason two, because this is where the pressure gets harder to ignore. This war raises the cost of every decision because Trump is not just managing Iran as a geopolitical problem. He is managing it in the shadow of a threat history that already exists. And that changes the emotional geometry of the presidency. Because in a normal crisis, a president can at least pretend the risk is being weighed at a distance. Here, the distance is smaller. The threat is more intimate. The stakes are more personal. Even if Trump never admits that publicly, the security state around him has to take it seriously. That means tighter precautions, heavier intelligence scrutiny, more concern about retaliation, and more pressure to prove that deterrence still works. That is exhausting, and you can already see the wider war making everything more combustible. CBS reported that Iran signaled readiness for a long war of attrition while drones hit ships in and around the Strait of Hormuz, and AP reported today that Iran struck Gulf energy sites after Israeli attacks on its gas infrastructure. That's the concrete example for reason 2. This is not a frozen threat picture from last year. It is a live war environment layered on top of an older assassination threat narrative. And the punchline is simple. When a conflict threatens national interests and revives a threat to the president's own life, every decision becomes heavier, slower, and more politically explosive. Now let's get to reason 3, because this is where the word panic needs to be translated into something more useful. The real issue is not whether Trump is panicking on camera. The real issue is whether the pressure is making him look reactive. That's the dangerous zone. Because a leader can project strength all day long and still look increasingly trapped by events. He can sound defiant and still be narrowing his own options. He can threaten escalation and still be signaling that the war is getting harder to contain than he expected. That is what people are picking up on. And there are real reasons for that impression. Trump has publicly said the war could end pretty quickly, but the conflict has instead widened into shipping attacks, energy strikes, allied hesitation, and calls for more military resources. AP reported that the Pentagon is moving more ships and Marines to the region, and that Trump has pushed other countries to help secure the Strait of Hormuz, even as many have resisted deeper involvement. That's the concrete example for reason 3. The war keeps getting bigger while the messaging keeps trying to make it sound manageable. And here's the punchline. When your timeline shrinks and the conflict expands, confidence starts looking like overcompensation. That is where the panic narrative comes from. Not necessarily from one facial expression, not one leaked quote, but from the mismatch between what the administration says and how much more dangerous the map keeps becoming. Now here's the part people keep missing. A war can threaten a president's life without needing a Hollywood-style scene. It can do it by increasing the incentive for retaliation, by reviving dormant plots, by stretching security resources, by making every foreign trip, rally, and public appearance part of a bigger threat matrix. And the U.S. has already treated the Iran-linked threat to Trump seriously enough to bring charges in federal court and publicly discuss it at the highest levels. That should get your attention, because this is where politics and national security fuse in a way that is incredibly hard to separate later. If Trump escalates, critics will say the war got personal. If he de-escalates, critics will say he blinked because the pressure got too real. If he stays in the middle, he risks looking like he is improvising while the region burns hotter around him. That is a brutal triangle. And presidents hate brutal triangles because every exit costs something. This is also why the Trump panics line is so sticky, even if it's too simplistic on its face. People are not really reacting to one proven panic moment. They are reacting to the shape of the box around him. A war he said he could control. An enemy already accused by U.S. authorities of targeting him. A region getting more chaotic, not less. Rising costs. More ships. More threats. More headlines about escalation and replenishing America's bombs and missiles. That looks like pressure. A lot of pressure. And pressure is what produces the behavior people then label as panic. Now, there is another counterpoint worth adding, because credibility matters. Presidents often face personal threats from hostile states or extremist actors without allowing that to dictate grand strategy in any simple way. Security systems exist to absorb exactly that kind of pressure, and public rhetoric in wartime is often intentionally extreme. So the existence of a threat does not prove that Trump's decisions are irrational or personally driven. It proves only that the environment around those decisions is more charged than usual. That's fair, but fair does not mean comforting. Because even if you strip away the exaggerated language, the core reality remains. This war has brought Trump into direct collision with a threat story that already had his name in it. And that changes the optics of every military move from here forward. Think about how that plays politically. Every strike on Iran now invites two competing interpretations. One, that Trump is trying to restore deterrence and punish escalation. Two, that he is acting under the shadow of a personal threat he cannot afford to look weak against. Every warning he issues can be read as strength or insecurity. Every move toward negotiation can be read as prudence or retreat. Every move toward escalation can be read as control or overreaction. That ambiguity is poison for clean leadership. And clean leadership is exactly what a president needs in wartime. This is why the current moment feels so unstable. Not because we have one single piece of proof that Trump is in private collapse, but because the external signs all point toward a presidency trying to contain multiple fires at once. The military fire, the regional fire, the shipping fire, the political fire, and sitting behind all of it, the old personal threat fire that never fully went away. Now let's do a quick reset, because this is where long scripts usually start looping and losing people. So far, the picture is simple. 1. There is a documented Iran-linked assassination threat narrative involving Trump in the background. 2. The current war is widening across shipping, energy, and regional retaliation. 3. That combination makes every Trump decision look more personal, more pressured, and more politically dangerous than a normal conflict decision. That's the whole machine. And now we can ask the harder question. What does that pressure do to a presidency built on projecting dominance? It squeezes it. Because Trump's political brand has always depended on one core image. He is never cornered, never rattled, never conceding ground emotionally, even when the situation is ugly. But wars are different. Wars produce timelines you don't control, enemies you can't fully script, casualties you can't fully spin. And once the enemy is one your own government has already linked to plots against your life, the pressure gets even stranger. Now strength must be shown, but not too recklessly. Now caution must be exercised, but not too visibly. Now deterrence must work, because if it doesn't, the personal threat narrative gets louder. That is how leaders end up boxed in. And once a leader is boxed in, the language starts to matter more. Big threats, big promises, big declarations that victory is near, or that the other side is broken, or that the end will come soon. We've already seen some of that pattern in Trump's public comments about the war ending quickly and Iran being under immense pressure, even as the conflict kept throwing up new points of instability. That is what makes this story worth watching. Not a cheap meme about fear. A much more serious question about whether a president who built his whole political identity around control is now dealing with the most uncontrollable version of pressure possible. A war that is public, expensive, expanding, and tied in the public imagination to a threat against his own life. That is the kind of pressure that can distort everything. Distort timelines, distort incentives, distort messaging, distort what counts as success. And in politics, once success gets distorted, leaders start making choices not just to improve reality, but to repair image. That is when things get dangerous. Because image-driven war management is how small problems become bigger ones. You stop asking what stabilizes the region and start asking what restores dominance. You stop asking what reduces risk and start asking what looks weak. You stop asking what your allies can actually support and start asking what proves you are still feared. That's a bad road. And the region already looks volatile enough without that extra pressure layered on top. AP's reporting today described intensifying attacks on Gulf energy infrastructure and soaring oil and gas prices, while the broader conflict has raised fears over the Strait of Hormuz and prompted discussions of major new U.S. defense spending. So here's the clean takeaway. This story is not really about proving that Trump is privately panicking. It's about recognizing that the war has created the exact kind of environment where even a president who projects total confidence can start looking strategically compressed. And when that war overlaps with an Iran-linked threat story against his own life, the pressure becomes impossible to separate from the politics. That is why this matters. Not because one man might be scared, because one man under that much pressure can change the course of a war. And that leaves the real question. As this conflict gets wider and more personal, is Trump still shaping the war, or is the war starting to shape him?